Law schools are lying to you about jobs, and the people who are supposed to stop them just gave them permission. I've got it all in writing. Last fall, the American Bar Association sent law schools an email. The American Bar Association is the organization that decides which law schools count and which don't. Now, the email had three changes to how law schools have to report jobs, and I'm going to read you the one that matters. But first, you've got to have one piece of background. For more than 10 years, every law school's employment report had a separate line called Law School Funded. That line told you how many of a school's reported jobs were jobs the school itself paid for, including postgrad fellowships, research gigs, made up positions where the school cuts a check to its own graduates for a few months so they've got somewhere to land. And that number matters. It's the most important warning sign on the report. If a school has to fund its own graduates' jobs, that means the graduates couldn't get hired anywhere else. And last fall, that line got deleted from the report. Here's what the ABA actually wrote word for word. Quote, positions that are school funded will now be included in the first table according to whether they are bar admission required, JD Advantage, professional position, or other position. Law schools will now be able to count these positions as such in any employment statistics they wish to publicize. I thought I was misreading it at first, but it actually says law schools will now be able to count those positions as such in any employment statistics they wish to publicize. So that is the American Bar Association in writing telling law schools they are now allowed to hide their fake jobs inside their headline employment number. So imagine, for example, if the SEC were to send an email to public companies saying they could now count internal money transfers as revenue if they feel like it. Shady accounting. Now go look at the headline number every law school is using to recruit you right now. 82.5% employment in aggregate, the highest number in 14 years. But that number now includes school-funded jobs in the headline. Last year's 81% figure did not. The 2018 number didn't either, and none of the numbers below it did either. So this is one row that got measured differently than every row above it. I call this footnote laundering. You take a number that used to live in a footnote with an asterisk next to it, you erase the asterisk, and you roll the number into the headline. You've now got a cleaner story you can show with the same data. You've laundered the footnote. So the data does still exist in the report technically if you know which chart on which page in the appendix to flip to. But for 99% of applicants who read the headline rate, the asterisk is effectively gone. And the thing being laundered here is the worst possible thing to launder. School-funded jobs are not real jobs. They are jobs the school made up because the grads could not get hired in the real market. A school that has to fund its own graduates is a school whose graduates are losing. And of every footnote the ABA could have erased, they picked the one that mattered most. And here is what this does in plain terms. Last year, a school that paid its own graduates to look employed had to admit it on the report. The fake jobs got their own line. You could spot them, you could subtract them, and that would let you rank schools honestly. But this year, those same fake jobs are sitting inside the lawyer job column. A school that placed 6% of its graduates in fake school-funded jobs now looks 6 points better on paper than it did last year. Same deal with that 82.5% national employment rate everyone's been celebrating the past few weeks. We don't know how much of that year-over-year jump is real placement versus laundered school-funded jobs. We're not going to know for a while. And the professor who broke this story, Professor Derek Miller, flagged it himself the next morning, posted a follow-up. The title of his blog post was New ABA Employment Disclosure Protocols Obscure Law School-Funded Job Positions. He used the word obscure, and he's been writing about this for 10 plus years. He's saying the headline number cannot be compared to last year's number unless you do the extra math the report doesn't help you do. And how many applicants are really going to do that math? You're probably not. The 36,000 24-year-olds applying this cycle probably won't either. Now, the ABA didn't just wake up one morning and decide to delete the category. They changed the rule because US News changed the rankings formula first. It's a bit circuitous, but stick with me here on this. For years, US News treated school-funded jobs as being worth less in the rankings. They got half credit. And so a school placing 10% of its class in school-funded fellowships got a smaller rankings boost than a school placing 10% in real lawyer jobs, which is correct because those two things are not the same thing. But a few months ago, US News changed the formula, and now they give school-funded jobs full credit, treated identically to a graduate hired at a top firm. Once that happened, the ABA's separate category became inconvenient. If US News was now counting these jobs as full-weight employment, why was the ABA still flagging them as being different? The disclosure rules and the rankings were saying contradictory things, and so the ABA caved. Unbelievably, they caved. They aligned their disclosure rules with the rankings. So the ABA didn't change the rule because applicants asked or because law schools asked. They changed it because US News changed its formula. The body that is supposed to protect applicants from getting lied to fell in line with the magazine that ranks law schools. So the regulator following the rankings, which is the opposite of how it's supposed to work. And Professor Derek Mueller put it politely. He said, quote, "Now that those school-funded jobs have full weight in US News, perhaps the motivation for keeping them as a separate top-line category has decreased." And so that is a polite way of saying, we used to disclose this because it mattered, then US News stopped caring, so we stopped caring. So imagine it's May 2030, you're at your 5-year college reunion, you graduated law school 2 weeks ago, and somebody you haven't seen since college walks up to you and says, "Hey, you went to law school, right? You a lawyer now?" And you hesitate because you graduated 2 weeks ago, you're $185,000 in debt, you're going to start a 10-month fellowship your school created because you couldn't get a real lawyer job, and the fellowship pays $42,000. The guy who walked up to you went to a 6-month coding boot camp 4 years ago, works at a tech company now, makes $145,000 a year with zero debt. Now, you can't really call yourself a lawyer the way the question was being asked you because you haven't represented a client, you haven't been to court. You're just filling a slot the school invented to keep its employment numbers high. And next year, your school's going to report you as one of the 81% of graduates who got a lawyer job. And next year, some 24-year-old applying to that same law school is going to trust that 81% figure. Now, you got to know that every law school's headline employment number is a sales document. The schools now have permission to inflate it, and you can bet they will. What you got to do is pull up the 509 report. That is the disclosure form every law school has to publish. You find the school-funded jobs number deeper in the report and subtract it from the headline number. That is your real number, the only one worth comparing across law schools. So remember that what footnote laundering does is move risks off the school and onto you. Before the rule change, schools that funded their own graduates' jobs had to flag it where everybody could see it. But now after the rule change, schools with the worst placement now get the cleanest looking numbers. They can roll the jobs into the lawyer column, even though the school's the one funding those jobs. The whole thing has been flipped around. If you want my help getting a better LSAT score, getting into better law schools, getting into the law schools that don't play these shady games and are upfront about their outcomes, and the outcomes are outcomes worth pursuing, giving you a better return on your investment in tuition, helping you get more scholarship money to minimize the tuition that you're liable to pay, I'm happy to help you out. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. I'm also offering a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. The link to grab that cheat sheet is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. Link is below the video on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. Free download, no obligation, available to everyone watching this. See some questions here in the chat. I will get to as many of those as I can. I see Strategos is asking, I got a 3.75 GPA and a 174 LSAT. Do I have a shot at Cornell? Yes, you do have a shot. Those are pretty good numbers. The 174 LSAT in particular is above Cornell's LSAT median. The 3.75 GPA is a bit below the median. For those who aren't aware, there is a lot of grade inflation these days. And so the top 14 law schools all have GPA medians in the 3.9 range. They're ranging from 3.92 to 3.99, which in my opinion is absolutely insane. But there's a lot of grade inflation in college. A lot of folks taking EZA classes, a lot of folks majoring in the humanities, which are, of course, subject to a lot of grade inflation. And so if your GPA is below a 3.9, no reason to feel bad about it. You just got to balance it out with a higher LSAT score to compensate. But the good news is that most law schools weigh your LSAT score more heavily than your undergraduate GPA anyway. Most law schools are splitter friendly, and so there are many options available to you in terms of if you can get a higher LSAT score. Now the question, how do you get a higher LSAT score? It comes down to how you prepare from the beginning. And so I divide LSAT prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is building a strong foundation in the different LSAT sections, the different LSAT question types. You've got roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions, depending on how you count them. You've got strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, and so on. There's also reading comp to work on. That's a whole third of the test, of course. But you don't want to just drill LSAT questions by type, because it's not enough to drill the questions and get them right in a drill context. You got to get them right under test day conditions, considering pacing and time management and endurance. And so we get you out of the drilling and out of the foundational work, out of the theory, into more test day experiences, doing individual timed sections to work on your pacing and your time management, when to speed up, when to slow down, when to flag questions and skip them and come back to them later, and then full-length timed exams to build up your endurance. And so if you want to take the LSAT in the fall, I see the Roland Beans asking about that. I would say you want to aim for the LSAT in one of the upcoming administrations this fall. For those who aren't aware, the LSAT is offered 8 times a year. Coming up, you've got the June LSAT in about a month. You've got the August LSAT, September, October, and November this calendar year. You could take any of those LSATs. You could take all of those LSATs and apply to law school this fall. And when you apply earlier in the cycle, it's a bit easier to get in. There's also more scholarship money available to you. And with 3 to 5 months or 6 months of studying, there's no reason you can't get a top LSAT score over that time frame. I would say, broadly speaking, maybe devote 1 or 2 months to foundational work, 1 or 2 months to timed sections and pacing, 1 or 2 months to full-length exams. The particulars, of course, we could talk through on a private call if you want to book that free tutoring lesson with me. The link to book it is unpluggedprep.com/start. What we do during those free tutoring lessons is we look at where you're currently scoring if you've taken a practice test, what's your goal LSAT score, and what's your time frame. So we look at the delta or the difference between your current starting point and your goal score. We look at how much time there is until your LSAT test date, considering number of weeks, number of months. Then we look at what are your other obligations. What else do you have going on? Are you working? Are you in school? Do you have family obligations? Then we craft a personal study plan to get you from here to there over that time frame. Every student's study plan will look different based on their particulars, and so I can talk generally in this context, answering the questions rolling in here, but if you want to talk through it more personally, you can book that free tutoring lesson with me, and we could talk through the specifics considering your situation. There's really no such thing as a one-size-fits-all study plan. Everyone's at a different starting point. Everybody's got different goals. Everyone has different timeframes and obligations, and so we can always personalize it to your situation. Yes, I am seeing the questions here, Lori. I'm answering them as they come in. Feel free to drop them in. I'll get to as many as I can. Kenneth is asking, is a 165 a good LSAT score considering the trends in obligations? And so I don't really say that any particular number is good or bad, unless it's really, really good or really, really bad. The question is good for what? Good for what end? Good for what goal? And so a 165 LSAT score is an above average LSAT score. It's above the medians of a decent number of law schools. But is it good for you? The answer to that would depend on what law schools do you want to go to what extent are you looking for scholarship money, and what's your undergraduate GPA. We've got to know the answers to those questions to tell you whether that LSAT score will serve you in achieving your goals. Assuming that your GPA is at the medians of the law schools you're talking about, that you're considering, then the question is your 165 above the medians, at the medians, below the medians? And do you want to be significantly above the medians, not only to get into law school, but also get scholarship money? So I say a number is good if it's above the medians. I say it's really good if it's above the 75th percentile of the law schools that you're targeting. Because if your numbers are good relative to their medians, the better they are, the higher they are above those medians, the more likely you are to get into a given law school, the more likely you are to get significant scholarship money. And every law school has different numbers, different requirements, different thresholds or benchmarks that you've got to pass to get the scholarship money. There are approximately 200 American Bar Association accredited law schools. Each one has its own unique requirements. And so knowing more about your goals and your schools you're targeting would let me better advise you on whether your number is sufficient. Now, if you're applying to law school this fall, you've got a lot of time to get your LSAT score higher if you would like to get it higher. I don't see any reason why you shouldn't or couldn't or wouldn't, right? Because if we're speaking now in May and you've got 4 months till applications open, that means you've got 3 to 4 months to study for the LSAT more, retake it, get a higher score. If you could raise your LSAT up to 170 plus, you would have significantly better outcomes in terms of getting into better law schools, getting more scholarship money. And I guess you can't really do a whole lot to raise your GPA in 3 to 4 months from undergrad, especially if you've already graduated. But retaking the LSAT one day, 2.5 hours, will weigh more heavily than your entire undergraduate GPA combined. And so if you want to talk through what your retake prep could look like beyond what I've shared here, you can book the free LSAT tutoring with me, and we could talk through it more. Bob says, thank you for all your advice. Scored a 174, headed to Columbia Law full ride, Hamilton scholarship. Awesome, Bob. Congrats. That's a wonderful outcome. Really happy for you. He says, I remember joining your live advice and you told me to retake. I went from 160 to 174. Amazing. That is a stellar outcome. Congrats. You deserve the scholarship. That's an incredible outcome. Couldn't really ask for much better than that. A full ride at a top 6 law school. Actually, my alma mater, I went to Columbia for undergrad, so cool to see that you're going there for law school. Fantastic. So you see there, I mean, Kenneth, you're talking about retaking a 165. Bob here retook a 160, went up to 174, got a full ride. So at a T6 law school. So there you have it right there, retaking, well worth it. Really no downside to retaking because law schools don't take the average of multiple LSAT scores. They only take into consideration the highest LSAT score on your record. So what do you have to lose? If you do worse, no big deal. Your previous high score still counts. If you retake and you do better, great. Now you've got a higher score on your record, and that translates into tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money, maybe even 6 figures in scholarship money, a full ride to an Ivy, to a top 6 law school. You really can't ask for much better than that. Alien's asking, can I get a full ride with a 168? Both to regular law schools in top 10s, GPA is a 3.9. Okay, so your GPA is great. My question would be, why not match that with a 170 plus LSAT score? Like, could you get a 168? Could you get a full ride with a 168 and a 3.9? Maybe. You could get a full ride somewhere. Not at a T10 though, because you're going to be below their LSAT medians and you're on point with their GPA medians. So in other words, your GPA matches the medians, but your LSAT is below the medians. And so they're not going to give you a full ride. You'd be lucky to get in if one of your numbers is below on the median. Still possible, of course, but you're not going to get a full ride at a top 14 law school if one number is on point and one number is below. So my advice would be, if you want a top 14 law school, retake the LSAT, get a 170 plus. If you're okay with a full ride at a lower ranked school, maybe somewhere in the top 50, your numbers might be sufficient, but why not retake? What do you have to lose? It's 1 day, 2.5 hours. You could retake it in August in 3 months. And that retake prep could be as little as taking a full practice test a week, reviewing it in depth, going over your mistakes with somebody, maybe drilling weak areas on the side, reviewing foundational gaps. But it could be as little as 5-10 hours a week of studying. And to look at it this way, I mean, if you spent 10 hours a week studying, I'll estimate the high end here, 10 hours a week studying over the course of 12 weeks, that's 120 hours of studying. If that 120 hours of studying could save you $120,000 in law school scholarship money, you would effectively be getting paid $1,000 an hour to study for the LSAT. Is that not a pretty good deal? Like, most lawyers don't make that much. And so you'd be making more studying for the LSAT than you will as a lawyer down the line, just from studying for the LSAT, doing something that's academic in nature on your own schedule. I know that LSAT studying might not be the most fun thing in the world, but it's serving a pretty good purpose. And not only are you getting the $120,000 in scholarship money or more, if you could get a full ride somewhere, but then you're also increasing your earning potential over the rest of your legal career, and you're also minimizing the debt that you're taking on. So you're also reducing your debt load. We're not paying interest on the loans that you're now no longer taking out. I think it's a pretty good way to go, honestly. I can't think of a better use of your time this summer, putting in 10 hours a week. That could be maybe 4 hours Saturday morning, 4 hours Sunday morning, then 30 minutes a day during the week, 1 day off. It's like a really light part-time job where you work from, say, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Saturday, Sunday, then you have the rest of your day free. I mean, feel free to disagree, but I think this is like a good use of your time, a good return on your time invested here. Eddie's asking, what websites or books should I use to study? The number one best source of practice material is the official LSAC Law Hub website. The Law School Admission Council has published dozens of official practice tests on their own website in the official LSAT test day format, matches the interface, the software you're going to have on LSAT test day itself. So I get the practice questions there. You get 4 exams for free. You get the others with a Law Hub Advantage subscription. Well worth the investment, $120 a year. They're not paying me to promote it, although I wish they were. It's a pretty good return on your time invested there to use those materials. The thing, though, is that their practice questions don't come with explanations for the most part, and there's no one you could talk to or get feedback from on what you're getting wrong and why you're getting it wrong. And so if you want to talk through your prep, if you want some guidance on your study plan, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally, and I'll help you talk through things, figure out a plan of attack for you to get from your current starting point up to your goal score on your time frame. You can book that free tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG as well. I see Owen's asking, does your LSAT score or GPA matter more for admissions? So the truth is, they both matter a lot more than the so-called soft factors, like your application essays, your letters of recommendation, your resume. None of those are that important because they're not quantifiable metrics. They're not factored into the US News rankings, and so nobody cares about them that much for that reason. Then LSAT is number 1 factor, GPA is number 2. LSAT weighs much more heavily because it is a more apples to apples comparison across applicants of different ages with different majors from different undergrads. For example, if you major in the humanities at an Ivy League university or another elite university, it's easy to get A's. If you major in STEM at a state school, for example, or STEM anywhere really, but especially at a state school, it's going to be harder to get a high GPA. And so the GPA is a pretty imperfect metric because it might be harder to get a 3.5 in engineering than to get a 4.0 in sociology, but a 4.0 is a 4.0 as far as US News is concerned. And so law schools just give less weight to GPA for that reason. They give more weight to the LSAT because your LSAT is the same regardless of who you are, where you went to college, how long it's been since you were in undergrad, what you majored in. And so LSAT number 1 by far, GPA number 2, everything else a distant third. I see a question from Harcourt asking about international students. Funny thing about international applicants is that your GPA doesn't matter. If you went to undergrad outside North America, your GPA does not matter because law schools don't know how to interpret your transcript and they don't care to figure out, which I think is crazy if they don't want to learn, considering the importance, but they just say, you know what, forget it. And so for that reason, your GPA is like a big question mark, and they just place all that weight on your LSAT score instead. It's crazy, but that's just how it works. There's a lot of problems with the admissions process as it exists right now, but nobody's fixing it anytime soon. And so this is what it is. And so if you went to undergrad outside North America, your LSAT score becomes that much more important, just how it is, which could be a good opportunity, right? Because if your GPA is lower than you would have liked it to be, or you want to raise your odds of getting in and getting scholarship money radically, then all you would do is go really hard at the LSAT to get a higher score and boost your odds of admission significantly. Got a question here from Manveer about California law schools. Live in Sacramento, UC Davis and Pacific are the nearest ABA schools. Looking at others in California, want a full ride? Is it a good idea? Yeah, I would say going for a full ride to a law school that is local to you, near where you want to practice, makes perfect sense to me. For those who aren't aware, you don't want to strictly go by the US News rankings when you're looking at law schools because a law school will have its best reputation in its local area because there are a lot of graduates of that law school practicing in that local area. And so to go to law school in Sacramento or near Sacramento, if you want to practice and live in Sacramento, makes perfect sense to me. And if you can get a full ride from a local law school, not have to relocate and not take on debt, not have to pay tuition, that seems like the optimal outcome. And so what you'd want to do is you want to look at how do your stats, your GPA and your LSAT, how do they stack up at the local law school? So what is UC Davis's medians? What are Pacific Law School's LSAT and GPA medians? How do you stack up? And if your GPA is below the medians, you want to have a relatively higher LSAT score in order to compensate. And you'll see, Tyler Surreal says, Steve calling out the sociology major out again. Yeah, I always hit on sociology for some reason, don't know why. I actually took a couple of sociology classes in college myself, and I enjoyed them, but I also got to admit that they were easy 4.0 classes relative to anything else I could have been doing. But yeah, I mean, if your GPA is not what you want to be, higher LSAT is the answer. And you'll notice the theme in my talks here is that whether you want to go to a higher ranked law school with less scholarship money and more prestige, or you want to go to a lower ranked school with more scholarship money, the path forward is the same. Stronger numbers lead to better outcomes. Scanning through for other questions here. Madison's asking, is a 153 a decent baseline score? Just took my first timed diagnostic yesterday. That is a perfectly fine baseline score. It's 1 point higher than my cold diagnostic. I got a 152 initially, ended up with a 175. So kudos to you for beating me on the initial score. It took an entire year for me to get that 175, and at least half of that was a total waste of time. I could have done it a lot faster had I studied more efficiently. And so hopefully I can share some lessons with you today and in the future on how to get there faster, but totally fine starting point. A cold diagnostic simply tells you what you already know, which is that you have not yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course you can over time, and you can improve your odds of admission significantly by studying, putting in the work over the course of 2 to 3 months, or ideally longer, to achieve a top score. It's a function of, your improvement will be a function of the amount that you study and the way in which you study. So it's possible to improve significantly, and you're in the right place. And if you're looking for some guidance and support, I'm offering a free tutoring lesson for anybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and IG. That's an open offer for everybody watching this now and later, by the way. I've also put together a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. The link to grab that free easy LSAT cheat sheet is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. It's a quick reference covering everything in logical reasoning and reading comprehension. Easy, free, fun reference to help you jumpstart your prep or serve as a quick refresher, so you can grab your copy of that below the video and in my bio as well. Totally free. Daniel asks, have you seen people get into a top 25 law school with a 3.2 undergrad, 3.9 grad GPA, 166 LSAT? I mean, listen, I'm sure there is somebody somewhere who has had that outcome. There are people every cycle who outperform their numbers for whatever reason, usually with pretty incredible soft factors, but that would be unlikely. It would be against the odds. And your 3.9 GPA doesn't matter for grad school, because law schools do not take grad school GPA into account. They only consider your undergraduate GPA, because in part not everybody has a graduate GPA, and GPAs are typically higher in graduate programs than undergraduate programs. So you really got to say to yourself, I have a 3.2 GPA, I have a 166 LSAT. How do my numbers stack up against the schools I'm targeting? And for T25, T30, you're going to be below on both the GPA and the LSAT, just giving it to you straight. Lots of grade inflation, lots of LSAT score inflation as well. The numbers keep rising every single year. And so it's going to hurt you. Basically, I would say this, that you would be well advised to retake the LSAT and get 5-10 points higher to offset what is a pretty low GPA. Just giving it to you straight, nothing less would serve you, right? You can't really raise your GPA. You're already did graduate school, so undergrad's a done deal. But you can retake the LSAT and get 5-10 points higher. Just put in the work, and that will do a lot for you to boost your odds of getting into better law schools and of getting more scholarship money. Mara says GPA is a 3.25. Same deal. The GPA is low. Unfortunately, your GPAs are just low, and that there could be a wide variety of reasons for that. I don't know your personal situations, but Just know that there are folks who took the easy A classes, took easy majors, didn't have the same challenges you may have had in undergrad, and they have higher GPAs, and they'll have better admissions outcomes than you will, unless you can get higher LSAT scores than they do. And I hate to frame it that way, but it is a zero-sum contest, right? There are only a limited number of seats in any given law school. And so you've got to leverage the competitive advantage you can bring to the table, maybe not through a GPA, but through an LSAT. Mom, I'm not sure how to say your username here. Does URM status still matter as much as it used to in admission? So does underrepresented minority status still matter as much as it used to? I would say probably not. I mean, given that the Supreme Court banned race-based affirmative action a couple of years ago, I would think that anyone looking for a URM boost is going to be in for a rude awakening and not get the advantage that they're hoping to. Because the law schools cannot practice affirmative action the same way they used to. And there is an open question about to what extent they may or may not still be giving applicants a boost on that basis, but also know that the federal government is cracking down on this. There are a number of pending lawsuits with medical schools in particular and undergraduate institutions, and law schools are looking at those lawsuits and saying to themselves, hey, we've got to make sure that our admissions decisions are defensible should we get sued. And they're keeping detailed logs of the stats of their applicants, and they've got to be able to say why they took this applicant versus that applicant should they be asked. And so if anything, I think the process is getting more and more numbers driven as the result of the chilling effect of these lawsuits. And so no, I don't think you could expect a significant boost on the basis of being an underrepresented minority. That being said, law schools still do value diversity, and you are still permitted to disclose race in your applications, in your essays, and law schools can still consider what you share with them to the extent that it reveals something about who you are as an individual. I'm trying to speak carefully here, but not say anything offensive or say anything that could be misconstrued, but ultimately you can still share about your background in your essays, and law schools will make of that what they will. Share with them whatever you want and let them be the ones to defend their admissions decisions as they might need to in the future. Jay says, does work experience matter at all for your application? Hoping to get into a top New York City law school for fall 2027. Yes, it does matter. Law schools do like to see work experience. If you don't have it, you're not at a disadvantage though. If you have it, highlight it. But if you are a so-called KJD going directly from undergrad into law school, that's totally fine as well. I'd say it's a nice to have, but not a requirement. Law schools always like to see if you have real world exposure to the practice of law. So if you have it, talk about it, include it in your essays. If you don't stress though. Caroline asks, what suggestion would you have for me if I can't read the question and answer quick enough? So you're kind of asking, how do you speed up on the LSAT? And speed, I think, is a factor of your familiarity with the material being tested, so that when you see a new question in front of you, you're not reasoning through it from scratch on the first time. You're not reinventing the wheel under timed conditions. I mean, part of what makes some students faster than others is that they have the muscle memory of having done many LSAT questions like that one in the past. So when they see it, they can automatically relate it back to all the similar ones in the past. And so they're really pattern matching more than thinking through the logic on the fly under timed conditions for the first time. And so when you think through all the different LSAT question types, all the different methods of reasoning on the LSAT, so question types being the task in the question stem, like strength and weaken, flaw, necessary, assumption, parallel, resolve, and so on. Then you've got methods of reasoning like correlation, causation, confusing, necessary, and sufficient. You have cause and effect reasoning. You have false dilemma and the other classic logical fallacies. And so the more familiar you are with those classic logical fallacies and methods of reasoning and such, the more easily you will be able to relate a new argument back to what you've seen in the past, and that will help you speed up. So in other words, study more, practice more, get more questions under your belt so that you will be able to do that pattern matching more quickly under timed conditions. and then you'll be able to solve some questions in less than a minute. If you could do the easier ones faster, you'll build up a time bank for the tougher ones later in this section. And if you haven't already, of course, make sure to grab that free Easy LSAT cheat sheet. I go through a lot of typical common LSAT question types and methods of reasoning in this free download you can grab through the link in my bio, through the link below the video pinned in the chat. These are the flaw patterns, for example. You see there number 11, false dilemma. All the other question types and flaws as well covered in this document. You can grab it for free at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet, everything logical reasoning and reading comprehension. If you just learn what's in this document, that alone would help you speed up quite a bit. Christian says, how long should I be studying before taking the LSAT? I mean, how much time you got? The more time you can put in, the better. If you want a top score, you want to put in more time than someone who doesn't need a top score. It's kind of like an Olympic athlete asking how much should I train or how long should I train for. If you want a top 1% score, if you want a 175 plus, you got to study differently and more than the other 99%. Balance that with the calendar, balance that with the clock. Everyone's got limited time, only 24 hours in a day. There's the ticking clock of when applications open, so take that into consideration. But you've got 3 to 4 months till the LSAT in August and September. Applications open in September. If you need a bit more time, take another month or two. But there's a lot you could do in even just 3 to 4 months to get a top score. And if you're just getting started, start now. Now is the time. I'm also offering the free tutoring lesson if you want to talk through your study plan. The link to book the free tutoring with me personally is unpluggedprep.com/start. Links below the video, pinned in the chat, in my bio as well. Epic Gamer's asking, do co-ops count as work experience? I mean, you could put it on your resume. Is this something that you're doing like through your college for a year? Like I think what Northeastern does is kind of like that, where it's kind of like an externship. I mean, if you're in doubt about which form field to put it on in your application, call admissions and ask your pre-law advisor. This is not one of those make or break questions that's really going to like get you into a given law school if you put it in this section versus that section. It's an ambiguous thing. Frankly speaking, it doesn't really matter. And there are, okay, so it's Northeastern, exactly, yeah. So I mean, if it's totally a year and a half of work, yeah, sure, put it down somewhere. But I think the more impactful thing you could be doing right now is thinking to yourself, if I'm still in college, can I get a higher GPA? If I'm done with college, can I get a higher LSAT? Like I'd rather you get one more point on the LSAT than put it in this section of your application versus that section of the application. Like to me, these are the sorts of questions that involve kind of obsessing over minor details that are not necessarily that impactful, but getting higher numbers is going to do more for you. And I see here you've got a 4.0 and a 175, so you've already got the numbers covered. That's awesome. At this point, yeah, if you want to obsess over the details, be my guest. The other thing you could think about, though, is your application essays. Like, are those done? Because you still have the whole summer to work on those. It's May 4th right now. We've got till September 1st or so until applications open. So we got 4 months to get everything else in order. I switch gears and focus on the essays if you haven't taken care of those already. Oh, Kiki's asking, when in the self-study process does it make sense to bring in a tutor? Whenever you feel that you need to, whenever you feel you could benefit. I typically recommend bringing the tutoring earlier rather than later because when you bring it in earlier, you give yourself more time before your LSAT to apply the lessons learned from what you get out of the tutoring. And so if we can help you correct a misconception regarding a certain question type or help you find a more efficient approach, there's a lot to be gained. Versus if we bring in the tutoring in the last week, you've only got 1 week to apply the lessons learned and you may not be able to reap the full benefits. And so I'd say sooner is better. If you're not sure whether tutoring is right for you or you want a pointer on something, you can book the free tutoring with me and we can talk through it more. Scanning through the chat here for more questions. Smokesium saying, I've gone from 139 to 154 in 5 weeks. Do you think I could reach a 165 plus by June or August? Need an expert opinion with that? Should I keep doing what I've been doing, or what approach do you suggest for an additional 10-point jump? Okay, so 139 to 154 in 5 weeks. That's an awesome increase in a pretty short period of time. Congrats on your improvement so far. You got 15 points in 5 weeks. That's awesome. Can you get another 10 points or more by June or August? Yes, you certainly can. I mean, just do what you did a second time. Of course, what got you here may not get you there. And so I'd be curious to know what you've done so far and what's been missing. Some students spend a lot of time drilling LSAT questions by type, but they neglect doing full-length timed exams. Other students do nothing but full-timed exams without building the strong foundation first. And so I would need more context in order to give you better guidance on this. If you want to book the free tutoring lesson with me, you can do that right now. The link to book the tutoring is unpluggedprep.com/start if you haven't already. We can meet personally and talk through it more. You're saying it's all thanks to your program. Awesome. I'm glad it's been helping. Yeah, feel free to reach out and I'll see what else I could do to help you out in terms of giving you some pointers. But you're going strong. You're doing the right things. I mean, keep at it and we'll talk through it more on a call. Teacher asks, what percentage get 180? Less than 1% of students taking the LSAT get a 180. About only 1% get a 175 or higher. And so less than 1% are getting 176, 177, 178, and so on. So very, very few people each year get a perfect 180. And there's a margin of error of a couple points. And so no one who gets a 180 will get a 180 on every single exam. They'll get a 180 one day, they'll get a 177 a different day, and the LSAT is still considered a valid and reliable admission test. Consider that the tutoring, consider that the top 14 law schools all have LSAT medians of 170 to 174. And so even getting a 175 would put you above the medians for every single law school in the country and significantly improve your odds of getting in. Smoke Steam says, worked with your program, 1 hour of tutoring per week, 2 hours of drilling a day, 2 timed sections a week, and 1 practice test a week. Sounds like a solid study plan to me. I need to look more in particular into your analytics to see, like, are there certain LSAT question types or certain methods of reasoning giving you trouble? There are probably some areas where you're disproportionately struggling. And so if we just target those specifically, that's going to help you get a pretty quick boost. And for someone who's at a 154 right now, there's usually a couple of common question types that if we correct on those, we can get another 10 points. And so, for example, the most common types of logical reasoning questions are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. I would focus on those to start with. So necessary assumption, for example, are you applying the negation test consistently? Are you distinguishing necessary assumption versus sufficient assumption? For flaw questions, are you familiar with the classic logical fallacies, like confusing necessary and sufficient conditions, correlation causation flaws, ad hominem personal attacks, and so on? Are you familiar with all of those? Are you pre-phrasing or predicting the flaw before looking at the question? Then for inference questions, are you able to diagram conditionals when applicable? Are you able to recognize paraphrases between the passage and the choices? Those are the things I would look at. If we can just give you an efficiency boost or accuracy boost on those 3 types, again, necessary assumption, inference, and flaw, that alone could be enough to get you from 154 to 165, just focusing on logical reasoning. If I were to look at reading count, I'd think about, could we help you take fewer notes, less underlining, less highlighting, less note-taking overall? Can we help you speed through the passage more efficiently, looking at it from a structural approach to help you save more time to solve the questions associated with the passage? A lot of different potentials. Don't know all the answers here, but that would be a starting point I would look at. Savannah asks, the last LSAT I took had logic games. I'm planning to retake now and apply for the upcoming cycle. What should be my strategy? My highest is a 162. So was that a 162 on the old LSAT with logic games from 2 years ago? Because of course, as you know, the LSAT has changed. No more logic games on the LSAT. They replaced the logic games section with a second scored logical reasoning section. And so your strategy, all else being equal without additional context, I would say 2/3 of your prep should be logical reasoning focused, since the LSAT is 2/3 logical reasoning scored. Any gains you make in logical reasoning will be doubled across the two sections. So 2/3 of your studying in logical reasoning, 1/3 reading comprehension, although of course, within the logical reasoning section of those 15 different types of questions, some questions are more common than others. So you get more return on your investment spending time in those particular areas. And the three most common types of logical reasoning questions are, as I said to our students, Moxium, necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. So that's where I would start. I wouldn't get distracted by the less common logical reasoning types like parallel reasoning or evaluate the argument, because although everybody hates parallel reasoning because it's super long, there are very few of them per exam. And so you're not going to get as much of a return on your investment by going from 1 right on parallels to 2 right on parallels when you could instead go from 3 right necessary assumption to 6 right necessary assumption. So you could gain 1 raw score point, or you could gain 3 raw score points, and apply that across flaw questions and inference as well versus the less common types. And you'll see there's a certain like Moneyball element to LSAT where we do data analysis and we see that you get bigger return on certain areas over others. And that's how we craft our study plans for our students, keeping that in mind. Witchery asks, do you think they'll ever bring back logic games? Well, I certainly wish they would, because I really enjoyed them and I'm pissed they took them off the exam, but it's up to them. For those who aren't aware, there was a lawsuit. LSAC got sued, and as the result of the lawsuit, they removed logic games from the exam 2 years ago. And that was due to a settlement agreement with a couple of blind test takers who sued LSAC, saying they were at an unfair disadvantage because they couldn't benefit from diagramming in logic games the way other test takers could, and LSAC refused to accommodate them by, say, giving them a special version of the LSAT with no logic games, and so they got sued. Eventually, they settled, and as part of the settlement, they had to remove logic games for all test takers, not just the blind test takers. And so I think they could have avoided a whole lot of mess and chaos by just accommodating those test takers, but they wouldn't budge, and now logic games are off for everybody. I don't see them ever coming back, sadly. But one consequence of this is that there are a lot of people out there who are using old, outdated test prep books that still reference logic games, and a lot of the AI slop books on Amazon talk about logic games because the training data set AI was trained on thinks logic games were on the test, because most of that was 20 plus years of logic games references that are still in those data sets. And so if you ask ChatGPT what's on the LSAT, it might mention logic games unless you really push it. Johnny's asking, have LSAT scores gone up since logic games were removed? And the answer is yes. That is one consequence of the removal of logic games, is that LSAT scores have increased. There are other reasons as well why scores are increasing, but the removal of logic games is one part of it, because it used to be you're studying for the LSAT, you got to study logic games and logical reasoning and reading comprehension. And now, with no more logic games and logic games being replaced by a second scored logical reasoning section, that means there is less material for you to study. You just now can double down, narrow your focus to logical reasoning and reading comp only, and then any gains you make in logical reasoning are doubled across the two sections. And so less material, more focus, higher scores. And for those wondering, the other reasons for LSAT scores rising are the rise in LSAC granting accommodations for extra time, extra breaks. Less of a time constraint means higher scores, and the LSAT being offered more frequently means more retake attempts, and only the highest score counting means that scores rise across the board as well. And so that's why LSAT scores and LSAT medians at law schools keep rising every single year, and so your score needs to be higher to compensate, but you can also retake the LSAT, you can also study harder, you can also focus on logical reasoning. If you want to talk through what your LSAT study plan could look like, I am offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson for everybody watching this now and later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. I'm also offering a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. The link to grab that free easy LSAT cheat sheet is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. It covers everything you got to know. There's a quick reference for both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. covering the different flaws, the different question types, reading comp guidance as well for the structure of passages. You can grab your free copy of the cheat sheet at unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. For those just joining, I run these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you're watching this now and later. I don't do any advertising for these lives, and the algorithm doesn't really boost these because they can't run ads during them. And so I do appreciate your support, spreading the word, sharing this to your socials on TikTok, sharing this in any group chats you're part of, any Discord channels, subreddits, Facebook groups. The more this grows, the more I will expand it over time. I do appreciate your support. Thank you all for joining. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, all the best. Take care. Thanks for joining.